Hello everyone and welcome to Arcade Bike. Today is the second video I'm doing highlighting great civilizations of the Americas. The subject of today's video are the hegemons of central Mexico, Teotihuacan in classical Mesoamerica. Now, right off the bat, I'm sure basically everyone, at least in the US and in the Americas, who are watching this, when you hear the phrase Central Mexico, your mind immediately goes to the nation of Mexico, and of course, the region within the nation of Mexico that consists of various provinces such as Puebla, Veracruz, Hidalgo, and the state of Mexico itself. And of course, this is not an incorrect way to view things. After all, Mexico and by proxy Central Mexico have had their political boundaries for around 150 years, give or take, but it's not the full picture. After all, Mexico as a nation has not always existed. Um, it's only, roughly 200 years old, give or take, itself. So, in order to get to better understand how, after various processes, steps, and catalysts, Mexico became a nation and Central Mexico and Mexico itself took on its political borders, we need to go back a little bit further in time to get a better look at the larger picture. Starting with the early beginnings of Teotihuacan from roughly 600 to 200 BCE. So during this period of time, Teotihuacan would begin as a small cluster of villages in the Valley of Mexico, somewhere around 600 BCE. In the Valley of Mexico, of course, being in central Mexico, as you see here. And here is a map. And yes, it is a little sideways, but it was a large map. I apologize. As you can see in this map, these little black areas here are all of the various villages and village clusters in the Valley of Mexico during the first intermediate phase between roughly 600 and or 500 to 200 BCE. And during this period of time, the major political center in the Valley of Mexico was actually a different city-state known as Cuicuilco, which you can see here on this map, which is very famous for its major pyramid, which you can see here and here. But then between 200 to 1 BCE, roughly, the villages in the Valley of Mexico would begin to coalesce into Teotihuacan, which you can see here on this map, showing in the phase 3 of the first intermediate period, that between 200 BCE and 100 CE, really 1 BCE, that the village clusters would begin to, again, coalesce into what would become known as Teotihuacan. At the same time, between 1 and 400 CE, Cuicuilco would begin to decline as it was slowly abandoned and would eventually be covered in volcanic ash by the eruption of the Xitle volcano. And you can actually, here's the Xitle volcano, and you can actually see the a depiction of the lava flow or the direction of the lava flow once the volcano erupted. And as you can see right here, Cuicuilco is right within that lava flow. And here is just a map showing, again, the sort of the basin, the lake of the Valley of Mexico. And here's Cuicuilco here, and here is the Xitle volcano, which, as you can see, is labeled active volcano. And then here's a picture of the pyramid of Cuicuilco being excavated, which during the excavations, as you can see in this period, the archaeologists found that the pyramid of Cuicuilco was surrounded and partially buried by lava flows originated by the Chitle volcano. And so, of course, as a consequence of this, this would lead to the rise of Teotihuacan between 1 and 350 CE, with Teotihuacan quickly beginning to urbanize. And here's a map showing that, showing the first intermediate phase 4, or the middle horizon settlement between 100 and 700 CE. And as you can see here, the city of Teotihuacan has gotten significantly larger and has become significantly urbanized. As you can see in this map here, these are all the different buildings. And this looks like a city plan of a modern city, which is pretty cool when you think about it. And then during this time, one of the first major structures would begin to be in Teotihuacan would be constructed, that being the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, which was slowly constructed between 1 and 100 CE. And then the Pyramid of the Sun would be very quickly constructed in a very short time, somewhere in 200 CE. Being the largest structure in Teotihuacan. And this is the Pyramid of the Sun here. And this is a sort of reconstruction of what it would have looked like during the height of Teotihuacan. Most of the buildings do have evidence that they would have been painted some shade of bright red or dark red, as you can see here. Then slowly over time, the Pyramid of the Sun would be constructed over a Pyramid of the Moon would be constructed over a pre-existing structure between 100 and 450 CE. And here's the Pyramid of the Moon. And yet, while it is, of course, very large, it is nowhere near as large as the Pyramid of the Sun. And here is a map showing the different great structures in Teotihuacan. There is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Then there's the Pyramid of the Sun. As you can see, about half the size of the Pyramid of the Sun is the Pyramid of the Moon over here. Then between 350 and 650 CE, Teotihuacan would begin to assert its dominance over Mesoamerica, creating a hegemony in the region. And this really began to kick off when Teotihuacan continued to grow to the point that the population of the city itself reached an estimate of 80,000 to 120,000 people. And here's a reconstruction of the city, or what the city is thought to have looked like during its height. And as you can see, it is a massive metropolis. And then, of course, because of that, Teotihuacan would begin to exert political and cultural influence over other Mesoamerican city-states. And here are some of the city-states in the valley or the basin of Mexico during the classical period that Teotihuacan would begin to assert its influence and dominance over. With one of the best pieces of evidence for this being evidence for the influence of Teotihuacan over the city of Cholula, which is described in length by archaeologists such as George G. McCafferty in his paper titled Reinterpreting the Great Pyramid of Cholula, Mexico. And here is a sort of a map of the Great Pyramid. And in this paper, he points out how one of the biggest indicators of Teotihuacan influence over the city of Cholula is that the Great Pyramid of Cholula had Teotihuacan style tablero features, with the tableros being decorated with vivid colors to depict insect-like bodies. Now, of course, this doesn't necessarily mean it was completely based off of Teotihuacan. It did have its own characteristics that were very much indicative of Cholula itself. It just shows that there was some degree of influence from Teotihuacan culturally over Cholula, which is also evidenced by ceramics associated with a phase identified as Teotihuacan II, dating to the terminal formative period. And with McCafferty stating that the Great Pyramid of Cholula does indeed show both similarities to Teotihuacan styles as well as contrasts, with the similarities to the quote strong affinities with Teotihuacan being apparent in stages 1 through 3 of the Pyramid of Cholula, and then the rest having very much Cholula-based styles. Cholula cultural styles and indicators built into the pyramid. And this is backed up by other archaeologists, such as Gabriel Urunnuela, y Ladron de Guevara, and Patricia Fonquet. And I also apologize both now and in advance for, I'm sure, butchering a few of these Spanish names, so I do apologize. But they talk in length about the connection, the interaction between Cholula and Teotihuacan in their chapter in the book Teotihuacan, The World Beyond the City, chapter 9, titled Interwoven Discourse Exploring Cholula and Teotihuacan Interaction. And in this chapter, they look at the similarities and differences between the Pyramid of the Moon at Teotihuacan and the Great Pyramid of Cholula. For example, looking at the radiocarbon dates for that are associated with the various stages of construction for both of the pyramids, which show that they were constructed roughly around the same times, give or take, and in the same length of time. Essentially, they had similar construction sequences, i.e., stage 1 took about the same amount of time for both, stage 3 took about the same amount of time, and they had the same amount of stages, which you can see depicted in this graph here. And in this graph of the comparison of the latest stages in both pyramids here. Now, of course, there were some major differences. For example, unlike Teotihuacan, Cholula's stairways were not always bounded by osfradas like the Pyramid of the Moon is in Teotihuacan, and the stairways are occasionally placed diagonally at the corners of the plazas. Also, architectural sculptures like that of Teotihuacan are absent, as well as the site lacks modeled adobe decorations that several buildings within Teotihuacan exhibit, among other things. On top of that, the artwork at the Great Pyramid of Cholula is not at all similar to what is at Teotihuacan. The various censers and other cult items are different at Cholula, are different from cult items that you would find at Teotihuacan. That being said, there is evidence of a Teotihuacan enclave at Cholula, but not one that necessarily, say, had an army there. For example, as Suguru Sugiyama states, particularly significant is the absence of theater censors, especially if these were emblematic for Teotihuacan's military, meaning that Teotihuacanos probably mainly inhabited minor centers around and along commercial routes, but not necessarily at Cholula. with the exception of a few perhaps emissaries or traders, as suggested by the presence of the Teotihuacan enclave. Overall, suggesting that there was a relationship between Teotihuacan and Cholula, but it was more, say, informal and based on trade rather than, say, warfare or conquest. And this is also evidenced by the presence of trade goods that are heavily connected to Teotihuacan, such as the presence of thin orange ceramics, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video, as well as obsidian that is thought to have originated from Teotihuacan, suggesting that Cholula must have depended to some degree on Teotihuacan networks to obtain said obsidian. So again, suggesting that there was overall to suggest that both Cholula and Teotihuacan were successful political enterprises connected to each other, with Teotihuacan having some degree of cultural influence on Cholula, but never outright conquering it. In other words, Cholula still maintained some degree of independence while adopting parts of Teotihuacan's culture and relying heavily on Teotihuacan's trade items. Now, that being said, that does not mean that Teotihuacan did not participate in any military campaigns at all. In fact, we have very good evidence for Teotihuacan's military and in its embarking on military campaigns, such as when an army from Teotihuacan marched into the Maya lowlands, where they proceeded to depose the ruler of the Maya city of Tikal and installed a puppet ruler on the throne sometime in roughly in 378 CE. And here is the city of Tikal here in Guatemala. And this is a reconstruction of what Tikal would have looked like at its height. The evidence for this Teotihuacan defeat of Tikal and installation of a puppet ruler is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Christian Hofmeister in their thesis titled "The Nature and Extent of the Relationship Between Teotihuacan and Tikal." Where in this thesis they discuss various pieces of evidence suggesting that this military campaign against Tikal at the hands of Teotihuacan happened, such as steles and murals of Mayan writing describing an individual from Teotihuacan known as either Smoking Frog or Fireborn, marching from Teotihuacan to Tikal, with also other pieces of evidence and other records from Tikal suggesting that perhaps this individual was Fireborn was sent to Tikal by another individual known as Spear Thrower Owl, possibly one of or the single ruler of Teotihuacan during this period, and also possibly suggesting that the puppet ruler that was installed by Fireborn once the ruler of Tikal was overthrown could have been Spear Thrower Owl's own son. And here's a mural depicting Fireborn or Smoking Frog. And there's a few pieces of evidence that Hofmeister points out that backs this up. For example, there are ceramics that have traits of Teotihuacan ceramics present in Tikal, with these including censers with adornos and cylindrical tripod vessels matching the styles that were most common at Teotihuacan, incensers, thin orange ware, etc. Also, there's a obsidian from the Valley of Mexico or near the Valley of Mexico in Tikal, suggesting Teotihuacan brought it there, as there was not relatively limited obsidian sources in the Maya region, as well as the fact that there were various sites and structures that have Teotihuacan stylistic traits within both Tikal and other Maya cities. And so this leads Hofmeister to the conclusion that during this period at 378 CE, this individual Fireborn possibly was sent by Spearthrower Owl to march with an army to march onto Tikal, where Fireborn proceeded to overthrow the ruler of Tikal and installed a puppet ruler, possibly Spearthrower Owl's son, where they began to exert their influence over Tikal, eventually leading to foreign goods such as obsidian from or near Teotihuacan, as well as ceramics such as thin orange ware being transported and becoming endemic in Tikal. And then, of course, Tikal and other nearby Maya centers that were under the influence of Tikal adopting Teotihuacan cultural influences. And this is, again, backed up by other archaeologists such as Francisco Estrada Bailey et al. In their paper, Maya Palace at Homul, Petin, Guatemala, and the Teotihuacan Entrada, which is what the event of Teotihuacan marching and defeating Tikal is called. Evidence from murals 7, 8, and 9. And in this paper, Estrada Bailey et al. Look at the Maya city-state of Homul, which you can see here on this map, in Guatemala, specifically looking at buildings, specifically structure one complex, looking at various murals, such as mural 7, seen here with its Maya writing. And again, in this mural, it describes this event of Fireborn, possibly at the behest of Spearthrower Owl, marching and defeating Tikal and installing the puppet emperor, with this evidence being backed up by tripod vessels with Teotihuacan style motifs on them. Though they also point out that while Tikal very much was under intense direct influence of Teotihuacan, Hamul seems to have a mix of both Maya and Teotihuacan styles, and seems to have been only more indirectly influenced by Teotihuacan, rather than directly influenced and directly under the quote unquote thumb of Teotihuacan. And this may be because Homul itself was more of a subsidiary city-state to Tikal, i.e. Tikal held sway over it, and then when Teotihuacan defeated and essentially made Tikal, for lack of a better term, say a tributary or a vassal state, Tikal's vassal state, Homul, began to adopt the influences that had been imposed on Tikal. Furthermore, Estrada Bailey et al. Points out that at Homul, political struggle among local lineages appears to have been resolved in favor of a local lineage allied to the Teotihuacan-backed Tikal rising power, and direct military intervention from Teotihuacan remains elusive and unlikely within the region. So again, very, i.e., Homul was a case of interaction. The Homul case of interaction with Teotihuacan was indirect and mediated by another Maya center involving visits with multiple functions. And Teotihuacan influence within the region didn't just stay within these city-states. Teotihuacan influence also began to expand to Maya city-states, such as the city of Copan in 426 CE, with Copan being even further south than Tikal. And the evidence of Teotihuacan's influence over Copan is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Jorge Humberto Ramos Gomez in his dissertation titled The Iconography of Temple 16, Yaxpashi, and the evocation of a foreign identity at Copan. Within this thesis, Ramos Gomez talks about the arrival of an individual by the name of Kanik Yaxcook to the Maya city-state of Copan. With Ramos Gomez pointing out that with the arrival of Kanik Yaxcook to Copan, that he seems to have been using a title that possibly connected him with the powerful city center of Teotihuacan, which can also is also further backed up by the presence of cultural markers connected to Teotihuacan, such as a tomb between the Copan Temple 26 showing Teotihuacan traditions, as well as a Copan altar Q showing the founder of Copan, Kunik Cosmo, in Teotihuacan style artwork, as well as discs with Teotihuacan style imagery. Ramos Gomez then points out that the evidence indicates that was mentioned, such as the shell platelet headdress that is depicted on the altar being worn by Kinnick Cosmo, was connected to Teotihuacan warriors, indicating that Kinnick Cosmo was associating himself with Teotihuacan military traditions. And this was also on top of the subtle presence of Teotihuacan symbols on his royal monuments, suggesting that he was the carrier of both Teotihuacan and Maya identity, with specifically Altar Q and Temple 16, and other archaeological evidence furnishing clues of his office as a warrior. On top of that, he had diplomatic pursuits to marry local women, with his role as a foreign warrior maybe contributing to the founding of his dynasty and establishing a new sociopolitical order at Copan that would endure for 4 centuries between 427 and 820 CE. And this evidence of Teotihuacan influence on Copan is backed up by archaeologists such as Jennifer Marie Foley in her dissertation When Worlds Collide, Understanding the Effects of Maya-Teotihuacan Interaction on Ancient Maya Identity and Community, where she looks at multiple different Maya city-states, but again, within her dissertation, she also looks at Copan, where she specifically looks at stable isotope analysis of skeletal remains from early classic tombs, such as the tomb of Kinnick Yaxcook, and on top of that, instrumental neutron activation analysis of ceramics from Copan, such as 10 vessels and 2 lids from the Hunal tomb. And what Foley comes to, the conclusion she comes to, is that while yes, Kinnick Yaxcook was a foreigner to Copan, he was probably not from Teotihuacan, and that the foreign styles evidence at the Acropolis may be a result of indirect ties to Teotihuacan through his homeland, which could possibly have been Tikal itself. with other aspects of this model holding true, namely that he married into a local ruling family to consolidate his power. And also, stable isotope analysis indicate that Cuicuilco was a foreigner to the Copan region, but he spent his childhood in the region rather than central Mexico. And it's also was important to note that the Copan dynasty was founded 48 years after the Teotihuacan Entrada military defeat over Tikal, and therefore Cuicuilco may not have been a contemporary of the lowland Maya rulers who were defeated by Teotihuacan, but rather a member of the subsequent generation that claimed legitimacy through foreign ancestry and connections to Teotihuacan, i.e., Teotihuacan had essentially become a connection to Teotihuacan had become a status symbol of sorts. I'm from Teotihuacan. Or my father is from Teotihuacan. Therefore, I have a right to rule, if you will. Regardless of whether it was direct military defeat or indirect influence, over this period of time, Teotihuacan's area of influence would reach its greatest extent by around 450 CE, ranging from the Valley of Mexico all the way into the Maya lowlands here in Guatemala. With Teotihuacan becoming a multi-ethnic city with entire neighborhoods inhabited by foreign groups. And here's one of those neighborhoods or compounds of Teotihuacan. And here's another example of that. And as you can see in this map here, the various neighborhoods, with this neighborhood, for example, being a multi-ethnic neighborhood. And then there were also administrative centers, residential centers, military centers, temples, etc. And here is just another map showing the sort of dwellings that individuals in Teotihuacan would have lived in. And here is an overview of the entire city of Teotihuacan itself, with the purple areas being the civic, i.e. the governmental and ceremonial, i.e. religious areas, and then the green areas being where the elites of Teotihuacan would have lived, and then the yellow being the, say, middle class, if you will, where the middle class of Teotihuacan would have lived, and then the red being the low classes of Teotihuacan and where they lived. Also, archaeologists such as L.R. Manzanilla have proposed that Teotihuacan was divided into 4 quadrants or 4 sectors, as you can see here on this map, meaning that various neighborhoods were, divided into these sectors, which will become important a little bit later in the video. All right, so this brings us to our next section, the society of Teotihuacan. Starting with the government of Teotihuacan. So the nature of Teotihuacan's government is heavily debated, with some archaeologists proposing that Teotihuacan was ruled by a king. And this is discussed at length by archaeologists such as, and we return to Kristen Hofmeister in her thesis, The Nature and Extent of the Relationship Between Teotihuacan and Tikal, where she discusses Spear Thrower Owl, suggesting that he was a prominent individual from Teotihuacan, if not its ruler. With again pointing out that Spear Thrower Owl may have been the ruler, either the only ruler of Teotihuacan or one of the rulers, but she proposes the singular ruler of Teotihuacan, who sent Fireborn Smoking Frog to Tikal to overthrow the ruler of Tikal and place his son on the throne as the regent, i.e., or puppet ruler of Tikal. And she also goes on to suggest that Spirit Thrower Owl then may have been an abstraction to which fatherhood was ascribed to strengthen a new king's claim to leadership. So, i.e., it could have been a mantle for each ruler of Teotihuacan. With all of this leading her to conclude that Spirit Thrower Owl was indeed the ruler of Teotihuacan, or was very likely the ruler of Teotihuacan. However, there's this again, this is very much up for debate, as many other archaeologists propose that Teotihuacan was ruled by a city council of elites. And this is described at length by archaeologists such as Tom Froese and L.R. Manzanilla, or Linda R. Manzanilla, in their paper Modeling Collective Rule at Ancient Teotihuacan as a complex adaptive system. Communal ritual makes social hierarchy more effective, where they focus specifically on three temple complexes within Teotihuacan. Again, you can look at the layout of one of these compounds, specifically the palace compound, or a palace compound within Teotihuacan. And what they do within this paper is they look at three hypotheses, i.e., all of them based around co-rulers. One is that their co-rulers are weak, co-rulers have intermediate authority, or co-rulers are strong and exert amount 10 times more influence over the behaviors of the leaders of their quadrants, and vice versa. And then they modeled these hypotheses, testing them in 200 independent simulations, and then repeating these measures in 200 arbitrary initial configurations at each point. Of course, looking at each convergence from an arbitrary initial behavior configuration to a solution consisting of 700 behavioral updates in total. And here is a table showing their various results, where they suggest that the introduction of 4 co-rulers mitigates the conflicts caused by strong separation between the quadrants, but only when 2 conditions hold: that they have asymmetrically elevated influence over the representatives of their districts, and that there are community rituals to optimize their rule. Otherwise, their presence has no significant effect. And what this told Froese and Manzanilla is that if the hypothesis that Teotihuacan was governed by a form of collective rule, it didn't necessarily need bureaucratic institutions that were characteristically employed by collective pre-modern states to manage problems of collective action, and that a lot of social complexity within Teotihuacan could be achieved by stateless societies who were prominent leaders, but were in essence managerial individuals, had managerial roles without any substantial power over others' behaviors. So they also point out that, on the other hand, they must be careful not to confuse absence of evidence for evidence of absence, and that either way, there does seem to have been a degree of collective rule and hierarchical structure within Teotihuacan, with them even pointing out that their model supports the possibility of Teotihuacan becoming a highly distributed social political network that became more hierarchical as divisions within the city increased, even while retaining its heterarchical organization, suggesting that increasing political centralization and social hierarchy existed but could have been mitigated by the negative effects, uh, could have mitigated the negative effects of increasing social divisions, albeit only effectively alongside the continuation of collective practices of ritual integration. So, in other words, overall, Teotihuacan seems to have been a collective effort, um, ruled by a group of individuals, or possibly ruled by a group of individuals rather than a single individual. And this brings us to our next section, the religion of Teotihuacan. Starting with the fact that there is evidence for the veneration of the Mesoamerican storm deity, who is alternatively known as Tlaloc or Chak. And this evidence is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Caspar Rim Anderson and Christoph Himke in their paper titled The Personifications of Celestial Water, the Many Guises of the Storm God in the Pantheon and Cosmology of Teotihuacan, where they look at various pieces of evidence for the veneration of the Mesoamerican storm deity, such as this mural seen here, as well as effigy vessels believed to be depicting the storm deity, along with incense burners that depict manifestations of the storm deity, uh, with another supreme overarching storm deity providing over lesser storm deities, um, and molded tripod vessels showing again the storm deity. As well as the fact that many of the in fact, the five storm deity effigy vessels were found in ceremonial deposits under the in burials under the Pyramid of the Moon. And then, of course, they also looked at more murals and examples of writing, either depicting or describing the storm deity or storm deities, as you can see here in these pictures here, and this picture here, with this particular one being a white storm deity casting a sinuous lightning serpent with an atlat. With all these together, suggesting that Teotihuacan did indeed venerate a storm deity or storm deities, with some of them being called Tlaloc A and Tlaloc B. With them pointing out that despite great differences between the cultures compared, each showed a degree of affinity that enabled them to reconstruct a broader advantage of the underlying structure and symbolism of the Teotihuacan pantheon as a whole. And they also point out that based on the depictions of the Mesoamerican storm deity slash deities in Teotihuacan murals and ceramics, such as the effigy pots, that all the facets of the storm deity provide a smaller part of a larger, nearly inconceivable entity, which is precisely why ancient Mesoamerican theologians appear to have attempted to reduce the greater deity to smaller embodiments that were more readily conceivable and liable for interaction with human interlocutors. So, in sum, there is a great degree of evidence for the veneration of the Mesoamerican storm deity Tlaloc, also known as Chak, depending on the indigenous group you're talking to within the culture of Teotihuacan. There is also evidence for a great mother deity, which is evidenced in murals from Teotihuacan, such as the Tepentitla compound and statues, all of which show what has been identified as an aspect of the great goddess of Teotihuacan. And here is the Tepentitla mural here and here. And here's a up close of one part of that mural. And this is another up close as well. And here are some more depictions here. And here is one of those colossal statues depicting what is possibly the great mother goddess of Teotihuacan. Furthermore, some archaeologists propose that the great goddess was a dual feminine aspect of the Mesoamerican rain deity Tlaloc, also known as Shock. This is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Eliza Mendel in her paper, A New Analysis of the Gender Attribution of the Great Goddess of Teotihuacan. When we're in this paper, she looks at the various female attributes of the goddess, such as the gender attribution and dress, as you can see here. Also looking at various ear ornaments, skirts, and incense bags, and examples of apologies, and examples of pre-contact examples of pre-contact concepts of mixed gender from both the Maya and the Nawa speaking peoples, the people who would go on to create the Triple Alliance, also known as the Aztec Empire. With all this leading her to conclude that there was indeed a sort of dual gender identity for the great mother goddess of Teotihuacan, and that she was, at least in some degree, to some degree, just the feminine aspect or a feminine aspect of the rain god Tlaloc. But also, she points out, much like other archaeologists, that there seem to have been multiple deities depicted within these murals, not just necessarily the mother deity or Tlaloc, also possibly suggesting that there were multiple quote unquote storm deities like Tlaloc and mother deities like the great mother goddess, which you can see here with her describing rather than a single deity. I agree the visual record reflects several deities who are distinct from one another, etc., etc. And then this is further backed up by other archaeologists, such as Miguel A. Gonzalez Blanc in his paper, From the Great Goddess to the Storm God, Cosmic Transformations at the Boundary Between the Dry and Rainy Seasons in Classic Teotihuacan. And in this paper, he looks at various murals, such as this mural from Portico 2, Tablero 3, and Tepintitla. He looks at various animals that symbolize the passage of the great goddess. He looks at murals depicting the great goddess emerging from emerging as a clam dog from a star-like scallop. Looks at the storm god depictions of the storm god and tree vine branches on the east doorway of Tepintitla, with water streams emerging from the mirrors on the storm god's head. Looks at winged depictions of winged beings descending from the great goddess in a mural fragment in the Palace of the Sun. Looks at various depictions of flowers, Mesoamerican flowers on the murals in Tepintitla. And here's another example of the flowers looked at in the murals of Tepintitla. Looks at murals depicting the great goddess's hand melting and fuming Ali on Tablero 3 in Tepintitla, looking at mural fragments of a descending deity as a Quetzal butterfly in the Palace of the Sun. Looks at this depiction of the profile of the storm deities, with blue and red water streams surging from the frontal storm god's head, that are continued to be interlaced, red and blue streams along the border, with individuals being born within this mural, specifically the stream carrying entombed fishmen into the cave, among other things in this mural, as well as comparison of the icons in Tepentitla with winged seeds from flowers, as you can see here, and from other plants, and Teotihuacan style Maya mirror backs with the great goddess etching on it. And all of these pieces of evidence lead him to conclude that the great goddess eventually becomes the storm deity i.e., transforms herself into the storm deity to make rain possible, and that this was likely the most sacred moment in her passage in space-time between the dry and rainy seasons atop mountains and temples. So suggesting that the great goddess would shift biological sex, would shift gender between depending on the seasons. So in one season she would be female, in another season he would become male. And then more evidence for the Teotihuacan religion can be found in the evidence for the leaving of offerings and burials in a cave connected to the realm of the dead under the Pyramid of the Sun, which is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Nala Sugiyama, Saburo Sugiyama, and Alejandro Sarabia, in their paper titled Inside the Sun Pyramid at Teotihuacan, Mexico, 2008 through 2011 excavations and preliminary results. Where in this paper they discuss and examine a cave found underneath the Pyramid of the Sun, looking at the various shafts and floor and, of course, walls, as you can see here in this map here, where they find several burials and post holes, offering tunnels, etc. And here's some depictions of said burials that they found within this cave. And they also found some of the offerings they found were things such as a green mask with miniature projectile points in the left eye and cheek area. Here's a color example of what they found here. So you can see it's a jade mask. And so after looking all of this, the Sugiyamas and Sarabia came to the conclusion that one, this cave was not natural and was constructed and likely constructed along with the Pyramid of the Sun. And it was also not static, i.e., it was not constructed at one singular time. It appears to have been reconstructed and expanded during this period of time. And because of said ritual deposits and burials, as well as the well-known connection of caves to Mesoamerican cosmology related to the land of the dead, i.e., where people go to after they die, as well as the fact that this cave was in the ceremonial center of Teotihuacan, suggests some degree of connection to the afterlife within this cave and the Pyramid of the Sun. And then also, as I'm sure surprises no one, especially with my earlier mention of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, There is indeed evidence for the veneration of a feathered serpent deity that is common to most Mesoamerican cultures. And here's the Temple of the Feathered Serpent again, and you can see here the feathered serpent carved into the sides here. And this is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Alfredo Lopez Austin, Leonardo Lopez Lujan, and Saburo Sugiyama in their paper titled Temple of Quetzalcoatl at Teotihuacan, its possible ideological significance. Where in this they look at various murals depicting the feathered serpent, such as these murals here on the side of the temple itself, and of course various pieces of ceramics, such as the common tripod style Teotihuacan pottery, various steles, murals in temples, murals on shells, etc. With all these lines of evidence leading them to conclude that there is a strong reasoning, there's enough evidence to support an argument that the Temple of Quetzalcoatl was indeed a temple to the feathered serpent, and that also the temple was dedicated to the passage of time. And this is backed up by archaeologists such as David M. Carballo in his paper Implements of State Power, Weaponry, and Martially Themed Obsidian Production Near the Moon Pyramid of Teotihuacan. Where in this paper, he notes, as you can see here with this artifact labeled E, there was obsidian objects that were worked into the shape of a feathered serpent. Again, you can see that here. And there are other examples of obsidian feathered serpents found throughout Teotihuacan, such as this example here. So a lot of strong evidence of some degree of veneration of a feathered serpent deity, whether it was Quetzalcoatl or Quetzalcoatl, or Kukulkan or what have you, of course, is not ever going to be very well known until some Teotihuacan writing is deciphered or discovered. But there's still a pretty good amount of evidence to. And this veneration of, or the evidence for this veneration of the feathered serpent deity in Teotihuacan is further backed up by the presence of sacrifices under the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, which is discussed at length by archaeologists such as T. Douglas Price, Michael W. Spence, and Fred J. Longstaff in their paper titled The Temple of Quetzalcoatl, Teotihuacan, New Data on the Origins of the Sacrificial Victims, where in this paper they discuss the various burials of warriors or soldiers underneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, which you can see here with the soldiers having their hands tied and their jaws replaced by shell copies. So definitely indicating some degree of veneration and religious and ritual, ceremony connected to the feathered serpent deity and his or its temple. But it doesn't stop there. There is also evidence for the presence of a war deity in the pantheon of Teotihuacan. With this war deity specifically being connected to individuals such as Spear Thrower Owl by archaeologists such as Jasper Nielsen and Christoph Helmke in their paper titled Spear Thrower Owl, a toponym at Etelco, Teotihuacan, where they look at various murals depicting Spear Thrower Owl and also various pieces of writing depicting Spear Thrower Owl seen here and here, and his connection to the Atlat, the spear thrower, um, and other pieces of iconography as seen here. And looking at examples of Maya writing describing spear thrower owl seen here. Helmke also, and Helmke and Nelson also draw connections between the deity of the Triple Alliance, also known as the Aztec Empire, a war deity by the name of Huitzilopochtli, who oftentimes had an avian form. And so, after looking at all these depictions and these records, these examples of writing describing spear thrower owl, both in throughout the Maya world, they come to the conclusion that the individual who was "quote unquote" spear thrower owl during the defeat of Tikal at the hands of Teotihuacan may have been deified after death into a war deity, which is further backed up by his connection with the hill of spear thrower owl, which seems to have been the Pyramid of the Moon, or at least the Pyramid of the Moon is a candidate, as it has evidence for associations with warfare, such as raptorial birds and human sacrifices. And high-standing elites would seem to fit at a place named after a deified ancestor known as a great military leader. Which now brings us to our next little section, Teotihuacan warfare. So, for one thing, the army of Teotihuacan was heavily stratified, with atlat throwers and spear wielders being drawn from the elites of the city, while shield bearers and sling users were drawn from the lower classes of society. The army of Teotihuacan emphasized formations of concentrated atlat fire, which was effective against large groups of warriors. Merchants were likely used to gather intelligence. Um, Interestingly, fortifications were rare, only appearing in colonies of Teotihuacan, as the city itself was immense and had a large military. Furthermore, tributaries could not have fortifications because their construction would be viewed as a threat to Teotihuacan. Warfare was not conducted to conquer territories or kingdoms, but was rather conducted to control trade routes, to seize control of resource deposits, such as obsidian deposits, to exact tribute from other city-states, to install puppet rulers of city-states, such as the seen in the case of the Call, or to obtain sacrificial captives. Warfare was heavily limited by weather, with only small groups of elite warriors being dispatched in wet seasons due to the increased difficulty of mobility, while large armies could only gather in the dry seasons. Teotihuacan had an army estimate of roughly between 10,000 warriors at the lowest to 25,000 warriors at the highest. And here are all the sources that I got that information from. Now we're going to take a look at the soldiers and weapons of Teotihuacan. So this is generally what the soldiers of Teotihuacan would have looked like, or at least how they're depicted on murals in Teotihuacan. Seen here wielding spears. And here's another more detailed depiction seen here. And you can see them these warriors descending from the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. And in terms of the weapons they would have used, they would have had obsidian-tipped spears, as well as the other primary weapon being, for at least the elites, being the atlat, which you can see examples of that here and here and here, which would throw things known as atlat darts, which were, you could argue, long arrows, almost the size of spears, but not necessarily always the size of spears. That is a key point to bring up. And then obsidian knives would have been used to some degree. And as I mentioned earlier, just a couple of slides ago, the lower ranking members of Teotihuacan's military would have primarily used shields and slings to throw rocks. Um, and the elites only of the Teotihuacan's military would have been equipped with quilted cotton armor, which can be evidence for can be seen in carvings and depictions of the Teotihuacan military seen here. And here's a depiction, sort of reconstruction of what that armor would have looked like. Now, I know that seems a little bit odd, oh, cotton armor. Uh, why? That can't necessarily be very protective. It most certainly would have. It would have been. It would have been very protective. It would have been very similar to, say, gambeson in Europe, which is cloth and fabric and wool armor that would have been made very thick and could have very easily defended against, say, gambeson defended easily against arrows and blade attacks and even attacks from axes. And so the cotton armor of Teotihuacan would have been very similar and could have very easily defended from arrows and spear thrusts and things such as that. And then shields would have been used by the lower ranking soldiers of Teotihuacan's military. And here's an example of what an atlat, or how an atlat would have been used by Teotihuacan's elite soldiers. And you can see just in how it would have been thrown. The atlat dart or spear would have been thrown here. And it can be thrown with quite a lot of force and have a very long range. And we can see evidence for the use of these weapons in archaeological deposits, as discussed by David M. Carballo. Again, we return to his paper, Implements of State Power, Weaponry and Martially Themed Obsidian Production Near the Moon Pyramid of Teotihuacan, where he discusses and looks at these various obsidian production sites near the Moon Pyramid, where he found, and other archaeologists have found, various artifacts associated with warfare, broken projectile points, atlat dart points, broken blades, scrapers, etc. Cores for these dart points, early stage bifaces and preforms, which are the sort of the middle stage of projectile points, which you can see another biface here, and some more examples of bifaces and dart points here, as well as various types of blades, and of course, various just animal figures, human figures seen here, and of course, the feathered serpent obsidian figure that we already talked about earlier in the video. And in fact, here is just a list of all the different lithic artifacts and weapon examples, evidence for weapons being constructed and manufactured at the Temple of the Moon, seen here in this table here and this table here. All right, now this brings us to our next section, Teotihuacan pottery and art. So Teotihuacan pottery is very distinct for its for many of their ceramics having tripod stands at the bottom. And of course, they are very beautifully designed, having vibrant colors of red and green and whites and black, as you can see here and here. And here and here, again, note the tripod bottoms. And here as well, again, note the tripod bottoms and the vibrant colors. And then Other examples of their art can be seen in their murals, which again, vibrantly colored with reds and greens and blues, uh, oranges, yellows, etc. And here's some more examples of that here and here. And more examples of that here and here, close-ups of some of the murals. And then now we go into trade, Teotihuacan's trade, which is discussed at length by individuals, archaeologists such as David M. Carvalho in his chapter in the book Merchants, Markets, and Exchange in the Pre-Columbian World, Chapter 5, The Social Organization of Craft Production and Interregional Exchange at Teotihuacan, where in this he looks at the various trade routes connected to Teotihuacan, which you can see on this map here, as well as here, with some of the primary trade goods sought after by Teotihuacan being or sent out by Teotihuacan being things such as obsidian, lime, for quick lime for covering buildings and such, cotton, thin orange, ceramics, and various other types of ceramics. Here's an example of thin orange ceramics here. And then this trade, of course, was heavily connected to the Maya, which is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Marcelo A. Canuto, Luke Ald Thomas, and Ernesto excuse me, Arredondo. Again, I completely apologize for butchering the Spanish name. In their chapter within the same book titled Teotihuacan and Lowland Maya Interactions, where they look at the trade paths between the Maya city-states and Teotihuacan. As you can see here in this map, this is a very long trade route, really emphasizing the wide sphere of influence that Teotihuacan had. With one of the interesting trade goods that archaeologists have found being that of primates, monkeys, which is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Nawa Sugiyama et al. In their paper titled The Earliest Evidence of Primate Captivity and Translocation Supports Gift Diplomacy Between Teotihuacan and the Maya, where in this paper they look at various burials and remains of primates, of various types of monkeys within Teotihuacan, as you can see here in this depiction here, connecting them to various regions here on this map, with some being connected to the blue region, the Belarusis, and then some the Yucatanensis being connected to the Yucatan Peninsula. And here are some examples of the burials, of the ceremonial burials, specifically of these primates, such as a spider monkey seen here. And the methods they use to examine these ceremonial primate burials were methods such as radiocarbon dating of ceramics associated with, for example, the spider monkey burial, zooarchaeology to determine what species of primate each primate burial was, as well as examining the light isotopes and heavy isotopes, as well as the aDNA of the skeletal remains of these primates, such as the spider monkey, and also they used paleobotany to look at these starch grains and phytoliths and vascular tissue, as well as non-vegetal elements recovered from dental calculus of the spider monkeys and other primates buried within Teotihuacan. And here are some of the dates that they got from the radiocarbon dates, with them ranging from anywhere between 186, or sorry, 44 CE to as late as 487 CE, give or take. Of course, there's also this date that goes to 1254 CE, but as you can see in the other dates, it seems to be an outlier. And here's some of the comparative archaeological and isotope data that they took from the various primates they found within the burials, within the pyramids, both complete and incomplete. And here's the sort of genetic family tree of the primate burials found within Teotihuacan. And here are some examples of the microbotanical remains found within the teeth of, for example, the spider monkey. And so what this led Sugiyama et al. To conclude is that primates were being traded to Teotihuacan as sort of exotic animals in diplomatic gift exchanges. And as seen in murals both within Teotihuacan and Maya art, there seems to have been some symbolic ceremonial symbolism, religious symbolism connected to these animals, to primates, which would, of course, lead to them to be sacrificed along with captive carnivores at the moon and sun pyramids. Again, supporting displays of highly conspicuous and symbolic animals being sacrificed within the Teotihuacan area, with primates specifically being showing evidence that they had status as a cultural nexus between the Maya region, and Teotihuacan. So primates were a major trade good, diplomatic trade good between Teotihuacan and Maya city-states. And now this brings us to our next section, the economy of Teotihuacan. For one thing, the inhabitants of Teotihuacan would domesticate animals such as turkeys, rabbits, and dogs, while hunting mammals such as deer and birds such as ducks. With all of these food items being discussed at length by Nawa Sugiyama, Raul Valadez Azua, and Bernardo Rodriguez Galicia in their paper titled Final Acquisitions, Maintenance, and Consumption, How the Teotihuacanos Got Their Meat, where they specifically look at various compounds and ceremonial complexes within Teotihuacan, as you can see here in this map here, looking at sites that include zooarchaeological study. And what they found is that overall, the most common food animals found were animals such as rabbits, deer, turkey, and dogs, with fish and rodents being very much present, as well as amphibians and reptiles, but generally deer, turkey, and also waterfowl such as ducks, rabbits, and dogs were the foods that were most commonly consumed by the inhabitants of Teotihuacan. And you can see that in this table here, and if we go back here, in this table here. But it doesn't just stop there. They also found what is probably very unsurprising, a difference in food consumption between ceremonial and elite complexes and residential complexes, whereas in ceremonial complexes there was a larger percentage or larger frequency of the consumption of rabbits uh, within ceremonial complexes in Teotihuacan. Meanwhile, in residential complexes, there was a more equally distributed division of consumption with dogs and deer being the most common, slightly, and then just slightly more than rabbits, which followed shortly after, and then birds such as duck just after that. But of course, the inhabitants of Teotihuacan didn't just rely on meat, i.e., animals, for their food. They also had agriculture, with the inhabitants of Teotihuacan cultivating plants such as maize, peppers, agave, avocado, squash, tomatoes, various types of bean, cacao, tobacco, and cotton. Now, of course, cotton and tobacco weren't necessarily used for food. They were used for various, for example, clothing and ceremonial practices. But regardless, they are still agricultural plants that were cultivated by them. And then also, the inhabitants of Teotihuacan would harvest wild plants such as prickly pear. And this is the evidence for all of these is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Emily McClung de Tapia and Diana Martinez Rizar in their paper titled The Potential of Paleo-Ethnobotanical Evidence for the Study of Teotihuacan Foodways, where they specifically look at plant remains at Teotihuacan, where they find quite a lot of edible plants within Teotihuacan apartment compounds, including amaranth, goosefoot, wormseed, sunflower, squash, beans, sage, avocado, maize, hawthorn, Mexican cherry, green tomato, chili, etc. Sage, I believe I already mentioned that. Uh, among many, many more, which you can see in this table here as well. Finding actually burnt or cooked plant remains, such as these maize cobs, these corn cobs, and chili seeds, seen here, chili pepper seeds, beans, and prickly pear remains, as well as chia seeds. And again, here are some of a table of the neutral characteristics of the Mexican food plants seen here, and the ratios of C3 and C4 found found within edible plants in the Teotihuacan Valley. Now, this leads us to the next section, where we discuss Teotihuacan's well-developed production industry. With this subject being discussed at length by archaeologists such as Deborah L. Nichols in her paper just simply titled Teotihuacan, where she discusses the various production specializations present at Teotihuacan, which include things such as cosmetics, basketry, figurines, grinding tools, hide working, obsidian production, and the production of obsidian tools, textiles, worked bone, etc. With the neighborhoods of Teotihuacan specializing in the production of different items. With this discussed at length by archaeologists such as Linda R. Manzanilla, in her chapter within the book Domestic Life in Pre-Hispanic Capitals, A Study of Specialization, Hierarchy, and Ethnicity, Volume 7, Chapter 2, titled Corporate Life in Apartment and Barrio Compounds at Teotihuacan, Central Mexico, where we return to this map here, where you can see that there are definitely different neighborhoods with different specializations. There's one that has lapidary, one specializes in stucco, one specializes in obsidian production, another specializes in pottery. And you can see this again here where there are tailors' shops seen that appear here. Also, even military quarters with evidence of tailors, individuals who specialize as tailors being seen in tailors' implements found in the archaeological record within said workshops, needles and awls and various other items required by tailors for the profession of being a tailor being found, which you can see here in this picture here. Okay, so now that we have gotten the society of Teotihuacan and discussed it, gone through it and discussed it in depth, now it is time to look at the decline and collapse of Teotihuacan. So between 600 and the 900s CE, Teotihuacan would begin to decline in both population and influence. Which is something that is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Jeffrey R. Parsons in his paper, The Development of a Prehistoric Complex Society, A Regional Perspective from the Valley of Mexico. And in this, he discusses how one Teotihuacan's the like largest the height of Teotihuacan's collapse happened in the late 6th century CE, where it declined rapidly in size and influence, eventually only having 20 to 30,000 inhabitants as compared to its 180 to 120,000 inhabitants by the 9th century, 8th or 9th century CEs. With this declining even further later on in between 950 and 1200 CE to only about 5,000 people at most. The reasons for this decline are debated, with some archaeologists proposing causes such as climate change, others proposing social strife, or a combination of the two. And this debate is discussed at length by archaeologists such as Deborah L. Nichols in her paper titled Teotihuacan, where she points out how archaeologists such as Manzanilla point to environmental degradation from deforestation combined with drought as being the cause of, or at least a cause of, the decline of Teotihuacan, with specifically stating that this made the city vulnerable to more external threats, and also pointing out that Manzanilla also cites that distribution of provisioning networks began as groups on the periphery took advantage of Teotihuacan's weakening power. Okay, now it is time to take a look at the evidence for the proposed causes of Teotihuacan's collapse, starting with the evidence for climate change, which is brought forth by archaeologists Jongjai Park, Roger Byrne, and Harold Bumnell in their paper titled Late Holocene Climate Change in Central Mexico and the Decline of Teotihuacan. In this paper, Park, Byrne, and Bumnell look at an area north of Teotihuacan around the Santiago Valley. So you can see here on this map here, where they take core samples looking at the stratigraphy of the soil around the area and around the lakes within the area, looking at the macroscopic charcoal to determine the chronology of the various layers, specifically using accelerated mass spectrometry. Spectrometry. They also took pollen and charcoal samples for analysis and looked at oxygen isotopes from rainfall within the soil. And here's a table looking at the various pollen percentages within the area. And what they found is that the further north of Teotihuacan got wetter during the period between the 600s and 700s CE, whereas further south in central Mexico and even more further south, for example, in the Maya lowlands, it began to actually get drier during this period of time between the late 500s and 700s, 800s CE. Which of course matches up with the decline of Teotihuacan. And you can see that again here. We're right in between the 600s and 700s, maybe 800s CE. You begin to see a long period of drought. They specifically point out between 600 and 700 CE, which you can see here. After collecting and examining this data, Park, Byrne, and Blumenfeld conclude that during between 600 and 700 CE, a series of mega droughts happened, which reduced maize production within their study area, the Rincon Crater area, which pushed local agriculturalists from the area migrating into the Teotihuacan area, possibly causing social upheaval and, if not directly causing, say, a political collapse of political power, at least aggravating it, and causing more social strife within Teotihuacan's political sphere. Furthermore, the evidence of the mega droughts does seem to have affected Teotihuacan to some degree, with Park, Byrne, and Blumenfeld suggesting that the decline of Teotihuacan could at least partially be attributed to the 7th century droughts induced during this period, which they suggest were induced by a coupling of pronounced El Nino and El Nino weather events and reduced solar output. That being said, there is also evidence for social strife, which is discussed at length by Leonardo Lopez Lujan et al. In their paper titled The Destruction of Images in Teotihuacan, Anthropomorphic Sculpture, Elite Cults, and the End of a Civilization, where they point out the purposeful destruction of various items, such as marble statues from a temple within the Zala compound within Teotihuacan, as well as other structures and ceremonial buildings, which you can see here by the distributions of the main fragments of Teotihuacan ceremonial statues here. You can see here, and as you can see in this picture, there are clear chisel blows, clearly purposely destroying this figure here, or at least evidence of somebody purposely, or some group of individuals purposely destroying this figure here. And here is a picture of all of the fragments of this sculpture. As you can see, very thoroughly destroyed. And again, this is all backed up by evidence of burning of structures, for example, burned floors in structure E, burned temples, burned murals, etc., suggesting some sort of social upheaval and social strife that led to violence or the decision to attack and destroy uh, symbols of ceremonial and elite power within Teotihuacan during this period. And again, they talk about how this is a comparison to, for example, the fall of Rome or various other things such as that connected to the Nawa cultural beliefs of the 1600s, etc., etc. Regardless of whether it was climate change or social strife that caused its eventual collapse, Teotihuacan would still be mostly abandoned by the period of between 950 to 1200 CE, which again we return to archaeologist Jeffrey Parsons in his paper, The Development of a Prehistoric Complex Society, a Regional Perspective from the Valley of Mexico, where he points out that during this time period between 950 and 1200 CE, Teotihuacan at most had only 5,000 people left living within it. Now this leads us to our next section, the aftermath of the collapse of Teotihuacan and its legacy. Well, for one thing, Teotihuacan would be replaced as a regional center by cities such as Cholula and Xochicalco between the 700s and 900s CE, before they would be overtaken and fall under the influence of the Toltec Empire, which would become the dominant power in central Mexico between the 900s to 1200 CE. And then eventually Teotihuacan would become absorbed into the Triple Alliance, also known as the Aztec Empire. Again, it is almost completely abandoned during this period of time, where it would be mythologized as the birthplace of the gods of the Triple Alliance. And this happened between 1428 and 1521 CE. And then the legacy that lasts on to this day for those of us in the modern world is that Teotihuacan is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. All right, now this brings us to our last section. A section that I wish I did not have to do, but unfortunately, as I was researching for this video, it is something that I found some information that is very much alarming. So this is a call to arms. And the reason this is a call to arms is because the outer edges of Teotihuacan are at risk of destruction due to population growth, urbanization, and mechanized agriculture. This is alarming, as over 50% of the archaeological sites in central Mexico have already been lost to these dangers. Furthermore, resources for archaeological projects to salvage the outer edges of Teotihuacan and other archaeological sites are very limited. All this means if more funding is not found quickly, many of central Mexico's archaeological sites, including the outer edges of Teotihuacan, will be permanently lost. So, with that in mind, here are some things that I, would like individuals to do who are watching this video. First off, I want to preface this. I am in no way being sponsored by any of the things I'm about to bring up. These are just things that I think are solutions, or at least ways to help protect Teotihuacan from its threat of destruction. Starting with organizations to donate to protect Teotihuacan. These organizations, including but not being limited to groups such as the World Monuments Fund and the UNESCO World Heritage Organization itself, both of which you can go to donate to provide the much needed funding for archaeologists to protect and um, salvage the archaeological sites, both the outer edges of Teotihuacan and other archaeological sites within central Mexico. Furthermore, we need more individuals like myself to spread awareness about Teotihuacan through videos, articles, and books, whether it be on YouTube or TikTok or what have you. More people need to learn about this very important and fascinating part of the history of the Americas and indigenous history overall, Native American history overall. Uh, Also, we need more people to become archaeologists to research and protect Teotihuacan. And one could argue one of the most important parts, and this is, of course, aimed specifically at citizens of the nation of Mexico. We need more people to become politicians to protect all of Mexico's archaeological sites. And the reason I say this is because, for example, in nations like the United States and the UK, Japan and China, and yes, in Mexico too, but in I'm using these nations as an example. Um, it took people becoming key politicians to pass laws protecting archaeological sites. It took people in the United States to pass laws protecting archaeological sites, such as the National Historic Preservation Act, or the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, or the Native American Graves Resources and Repatriation Act. It took people in China and Japan becoming key politicians to protect archaeological sites, such as, for example, the tomb of the first emperor of China, or the various archaeological sites and royal tombs in Japan. It took people becoming key politicians in the UK to start protecting archaeological sites within the UK, whether it be Sutton Hoo, Stonehenge, etc. So, of course, that needs to also be done in Mexico. And yes, some of these laws already exist in Mexico. It's not in a vacuum. I mean, there are archaeological regulations, but the issue is there's not enough funding for them. And that's where more people becoming politicians to advocate and protect these archaeological sites is key, on top of all the other things that I mentioned uh, to help out, becoming an archaeologist, spreading awareness, donating, etc. So, and none of these are perfect solutions, and none of these necessarily uh, work alone. They all need to happen and work together in order for the outer edges of Teotihuacan and the archaeological sites in the central in central Mexico to be protected, or at least to be better protected. But at least any one of them by themselves is at least a good start. All right, so that brings us to the end of our video on Teotihuacan. I hope you all enjoyed learning about this fascinating, uh, massive metropolis, this massive political power uh, in ancient Mesoamerica. If you would like me to cover any of the subjects I mentioned in the video in greater detail in a later video, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. Also, if you'd like to see me cover any other great civilization of the Americas in a later video, same thing, leave a comment in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you all have a good day.